"Drop the tray, sweetheart. You're making the place look cheap." The words cut through the warm hum of the restaurant like a cold draft slipping under a door. And for a second, no one moved, no one spoke, just a faint clink of silverware and a low murmur of a Friday night crowd in a downtown Chicago steakhouse glowing under soft amber lights, where everything looked expensive and everyone acted like it mattered. And right there in the center of it all stood Emily Carter in a simple black apron, her hands steady but her eyes lowered as the man in the tailored suit leaned back in his chair with a smirk that had been practiced in boardrooms and private clubs. "Did you hear me?" he added, louder now, inviting the room to watch. And some people did. Some glanced over their wine glasses. Others pretended not to notice, because moments like this were uncomfortable but familiar, the quiet kind of cruelty that hides behind money and confidence. And then it happened. The tray slipped, not dramatically, not violently, just enough for a glass to tip and shatter against the polished floor, the sound sharp, final, and for a heartbeat the entire room seemed to inhale at once before a few scattered laughs broke through, light, careless, the kind that says this is entertainment, not a person. And near the window, a man in a worn denim jacket looked up from his plate, his daughter beside him tightening her small grip around his hand. "Daddy," she whispered, but Daniel Hayes was already standing, not fast, not angry, just deliberate like a man who had learned long ago that real strength doesn't rush. And as he stepped forward, the noise in the room began to thin, conversations trailing off, eyes shifting, because something about him didn't match the script, not the way he carried himself, not the calm in his face. And the man in the suit noticed too, raising an eyebrow as Daniel stopped a few feet away. "That's enough," Daniel said, his voice low but clear, the kind that didn't need volume to be heard. And the man laughed under his breath, glancing around for approval. "You serious? Sit down, man. This isn't your business." But Daniel didn't move, didn't look away, just held the space with a quiet dignity that felt heavier than any shout. And somewhere in that room, between the hum of the lights and the fading clatter of dishes, something shifted, subtle but real, like the moment before a storm when the air turns still and everyone feels it, even if they don't yet understand why. The man's smile tightened, just a fraction, the kind of shift only visible when control starts to slip, and he leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now, but edged with something sharper. "You really want to make a scene over a waitress?" Daniel's eyes did not move, did not flicker toward the crowd or the broken glass still scattered across the floor. He simply stood there, steady as stone, while his daughter's fingers curled tighter into his palm. And for a moment, the restaurant held its breath, the soft jazz playing overhead suddenly too loud, too out of place, until Daniel spoke again, calm and even. "No one deserves to be spoken to like that." And the words did not rise, did not challenge. They settled into the room like truth that had been waiting too long to be said. And a few heads turned away, uncomfortable now, because it was easier to laugh than to agree, easier to stay silent than stand. And the man in the suit scoffed, leaning back as if reclaiming his space. "You do not even know who you are talking to," he said, gesturing loosely with his glass. "People like me build places like this. People like her just carry plates." And a couple of nervous chuckles followed, thinner this time, uncertain, but Daniel did not react to the insult. Not to himself, not to her. He only shook his head slightly, like a man who had seen too much to be impressed by titles. "That does not make you better," he replied, and the simplicity of it landed heavier than anything louder could have. And somewhere behind him, a chair shifted, then another, the subtle sounds of people no longer relaxed, no longer entertained. And near the center of it all, Emily remained still, one hand lightly gripping the edge of the table as if grounding herself, her eyes lifting for the first time, not toward the man who had spoken down to her, but toward Daniel, studying him with a quiet intensity that did not belong to someone small, did not belong to someone powerless. And yet she said nothing. Not yet, because there was something unfolding here that could not be rushed, something rare. And the man in the suit exhaled sharply, setting his glass down with a controlled tap. "Manager," he called, not loudly, but with the confidence of someone used to being answered immediately. And sure enough, A figure in a pressed shirt appeared from the side, moving quickly, attentively. "Is there a problem, sir?" the manager asked, his tone already tilted in favor of the one who looked important. And the man gestured toward Daniel without even turning his head. "Yes, there is. This man is interfering with my dinner." And for a split second, the manager hesitated, eyes flicking between the expensive suit and the worn jacket, calculating, choosing. And then he straightened, stepping closer to Daniel, polite but firm. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your table." But Daniel did not move. Not yet. And in that stillness, something deeper settled into the room, something quieter. Then conflict, stronger than pride, the kind of presence that does not demand respect, but reveals who deserves it. The manager's voice lingered in the air, polite but firm, waiting for compliance, waiting for the kind of quiet obedience this room was used to. But Daniel Hayes did not move, not because he wanted to cause trouble, not because he needed to prove anything, but because something in him refused to step back when dignity was on the line. And his daughter looked up at him again, searching his face for fear, for hesitation, but found none. Only that same steady calm that had carried them through. Harder days than this, and Daniel finally spoke, not louder, not sharper, just clear. "I am not causing a problem," he said. "I am asking for basic respect." And the words did not challenge the manager. They invited him, quietly, to choose what kind of man he was going to be in this moment. And for a second, the manager hesitated again, eyes shifting, uncertain now because the balance in the room had changed, because people were no longer watching for entertainment. They were watching for truth. And behind Daniel, a couple at a nearby table exchanged glances, one of them nodding slightly, as if something unspoken had just been confirmed, while the man in the suit let out a short laugh, the kind that tries to regain control by dismissing what it cannot dominate. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, shaking his head as he reached for his phone. "I do not have time for this." And yet he did not leave, because pride rarely walks away first. And Emily, still standing near the table, slowly released her grip on the edge, her fingers relaxing as she straightened just a little. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to change something in the way she held herself. And her eyes remained on Daniel, not with gratitude alone, but with a kind of quiet recognition, as if she was seeing something rare unfold in real time, something that could not be bought or commanded. And the manager cleared his throat softly, stepping closer to Daniel, lowering his voice as if trying to resolve things without losing face. "Sir, understand your concern, but I need you to return to your seat so we can handle this appropriately." And Daniel looked at him, really looked at him, not as an authority, not as an obstacle, but as another person standing at a crossroads, and he gave a small nod, not a surrender, but of understanding, then turned slightly toward Emily, his voice gentler now. "You did nothing wrong," he said, and it was simple, almost quiet enough to be missed. But it carried through the room in a way that made a few people shift in their chairs, because it was not just reassurance, it was restoration. And for the first time, Emily spoke, her voice calm, composed, and far steadier than anyone expected. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes directly. And in that brief exchange, something passed between them, something that had nothing to do with status or circumstance, something grounded in respect, in recognition. And then Daniel reached for his daughter's hand again, giving it a gentle squeeze before turning back toward his table, ready to leave the moment behind without needing to win it. But just as he took a step, the man in the suit spoke again, softer this time, but with an edge that lingered. "People like you should learn where you belong." And the words hung there, thinner now, weaker, because the room no longer supported them the way it had before. And Daniel paused, just for a fraction of a second, not to respond, not to argue, but simply to stand in that silence. And in that silence, the truth became unmistakably clear. Daniel did not turn back, not fully, just enough for his voice to carry over his shoulder, calm and unwavering. Everyone belongs where they choose to stand. And it was not a challenge, not a warning, just a quiet truth that settled into the room with a weight no one could ignore. And then he kept walking, guiding his daughter gently beside him, their steps soft against the polished floor, as the tension behind them lingered like a fading echo. And for a moment, no one spoke, no one moved, as if the entire restaurant had forgotten how to return to normal, until the manager exhaled and forced a polite smile back onto his face, turning toward the man in the suit with practiced ease. "Sir, I assure you, we will take care of this." But something in his tone had changed, just slightly, less certain, less absolute, and the man noticed his fingers tightening around the edge of the table as he glanced around, expecting agreement, expecting the room to return to his side, but instead he found eyes that looked away, conversations that did not resume, a silence that felt unfamiliar. And across the room, Emily bent once more, carefully picking up the last pieces of broken glass, her movements precise, controlled, but her mind no longer in the moment, because something had shifted inside her too, something deeper than embarrassment, deeper than gratitude. It was recognition, and as she stood, handing the tray off to another staff member, she paused, just for a second, her gaze drifting toward the door where Daniel had disappeared, and the manager approached her quickly, lowering his voice. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern now genuine, no longer performative, and Emily gave a small nod, composed, steady. "I am fine," she replied, her tone even, but there was a clarity in it that made him straighten slightly, as if reminded of something he had nearly forgotten. And before he could say anything else, another voice called from behind, respectful, measured, "MS. Carter," and the name landed softly but decisively, cutting through the air with a different kind of authority, and the manager froze, just for a fraction of a second, his expression shifting as realization flickered across his face, and Emily turned slowly, no longer the quiet waitress blending into the background, but someone who carried presence without needing to announce it. "Yes," she answered, her posture subtly transformed, her shoulders squared, her gaze clear, and the man who had spoken stepped closer, holding a tablet in one hand, his voice careful now. "The board has arrived. They are waiting for you upstairs." And around them, a few staff members who had overheard exchanged quick glances, whispers forming at the edges of the room, while the man in the suit stiffened in his chair, confusion beginning to replace his earlier confidence. And Emily gave a small nod, composed, unaffected. "Thank you. I will be there shortly," she said. And as the man stepped back, she took one last look toward the entrance, where the door had already closed, where the moment had already passed, and yet something about it lingered, something that did not belong to status or power, something rare. And as she turned toward the private hallway leading to the upper level, the atmosphere shifted again, quieter now, heavier, as if the room itself was beginning to understand that it had just witnessed something it could not easily explain, and somewhere behind her, the man in the suit sat a little straighter, no longer certain of where he stood, or who he had just spoken to. The hallway upstairs was quieter, insulated from the noise below, lined with soft carpet and muted lighting that reflected off glass panels and polished steel, and as Emily walked through it, her steps were measured, composed, the same woman who had just knelt on the floor moments ago, now carrying a presence that filled the space without effort, while behind her, the restaurant floor slowly returned to motion, though not quite the same as before. Conversations resumed in fragments, voices lower, more cautious, and the man in the suit sat back in his chair, his confidence unsettled, fingers tapping lightly against the table as he tried to reconstruct the moment into something that still placed him in control, but the pieces no longer fit, and across from him, the manager stood straighter now, his attention divided, his tone more neutral than before. "Would you like another drink, sir?" he asked, and the question, simple as it was, lacked the deference it once carried, and the man noticed his eyes narrowing slightly. "Who exactly is she?" he asked, attempting to sound casual, but the edge in his voice betrayed him, and the manager hesitated, just briefly, then replied, "She is someone you should have treated with respect," and it was not defiance, not confrontation, just a statement placed carefully where it could not be ignored. And the man leaned back, exhaling slowly, his gaze drifting toward the private hallway where she had disappeared, and for the first time that evening, uncertainty settled in, quiet but undeniable, while upstairs, a set of double doors opened into a private dining room where a long table stretched beneath a chandelier of warm light, and a group of executives rose almost in unison as Emily entered, their expressions attentive, respectful, one of them stepping forward with a slight nod. "Miss Carter, we are ready whenever you are," and she acknowledged them with a calm glance, setting aside the last traces of the moment downstairs as if placing it gently out of sight, but not out of mind, and as she took her seat at the head of the table, the room adjusted around her, not with noise or display, but with a quiet alignment that comes when authority does not need to announce itself. And for a moment before the meeting began, she paused, her thoughts returning briefly to the man who had stood when no one else did, not knowing her name, not needing to, and there was something about that lingered, something that did not belong to business or negotiation, something rare in a world that measured everything. And back downstairs, near the entrance, Daniel helped his daughter in her coat, his movements gentle, unhurried, as if the weight of the moment had already passed for him, as if he had never needed it to become anything more than what it was. And she looked up at him with quiet curiosity. "Daddy, was that lady okay?" she asked, and Daniel smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "She will be," he said, and there was no doubt in his voice, only calm assurance. And as they stepped out into the cool Chicago night, the city lights stretching across the street in reflections of gold and white, the door closed behind them with a soft click, and inside, something continued to unfold, something that had not yet reached its end, though no one in that moment fully understood how far it would go. The night air outside was crisp, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the soft glow of streetlights stretching across the sidewalk, and Daniel Hayes walked beside his daughter without looking back, his pace steady, his expression calm, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if standing up in a room full of silence was just another quiet decision in a life built on many of them. And his daughter skipped slightly to keep up, her small shoes tapping lightly against the pavement. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" she asked, her voice careful, and Daniel glanced down at her with a gentle smile, the kind that softened the edges of a long day. "No, sweetheart," he said, "doing the right thing does not get you in trouble." And she nodded slowly, thinking about that, holding on to the words as children do when they sense something important beneath them, and behind them, through the glass windows of the restaurant, figures moved in softer patterns now, less certain, less loud, as if the moment that had just passed had left a quiet imprint on everyone inside, while upstairs, the meeting had already begun, voices measured, decisions unfolding in calm, controlled tones. But Emily Carter's attention drifted for just a fraction longer than usual, her mind returning not to numbers or projections, but to the man who had stood without hesitation, who had spoken without anger, who had walked away without needing recognition. And that absence of expectation lingered with her more than any display of power ever had. And as one of the executives finished speaking, she nodded, bringing her focus back with practiced precision, her voice steady as she addressed the room, guiding the conversation forward with clarity and authority. Yet beneath it all, something quieter remained, something that did not belong to business. And minutes later, as the meeting reached its natural pause, she set her pen down gently, her gaze shifting toward the door for just a second, and then she spoke, her tone composed but decisive. "We will continue this in 15 minutes, she said, rising from her seat before anyone could question it. And the room fell into immediate agreement, chairs moving softly as she stepped out, her heels quiet against the hallway floor, carrying her not toward another boardroom, but back toward something unfinished, something that had nothing to do with contracts or negotiations. And downstairs, the manager stood near the entrance, still unsettled, still replaying the evening in his mind. When he saw her approach, his posture straightening instinctively. "Ms. Carter," he said, and she met his eyes briefly, calm but direct. "The man who was just here," she asked, "where did he go?" And the manager hesitated, then gestured toward the street. "He just left a minute ago." And without another word, she continued forward, pushing open the door into the cool night air, where the city stretched out in quiet motion, and across the street, beneath a flickering streetlight, she spotted him, standing beside his daughter as he adjusted her coat, unaware that the moment he had already let go of was about to return to him in a way he never expected. And for a brief second, Emily paused, watching them, not as a CEO observing from above, but as a person recognizing something real, something rare. And then she stepped forward, closing the distance with a calm that matched his own. "Sir," her voice came gently, not loud, not urgent, but clear enough to stop him mid-motion, and Daniel Hayes turned slowly beneath the flickering streetlight, his daughter still holding his hand, her small figure tucked close to his side as the cool night air moved softly around them. And for a brief moment, neither of them spoke, because something in the way she stood there had already changed the space between them. No apron now, no lowered gaze, just a quiet confidence that did not need to explain itself, and Daniel recognized it instantly, not as power, but as presence, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are without needing anyone else to confirm it. And she stepped closer, her heels tapping lightly against the pavement, her expression calm but thoughtful. "I wanted to thank you," she said, meeting his eyes directly, and there was no performance in her voice, no distance, just sincerity placed carefully into the moment. And Daniel gave a small nod, almost instinctive. "You are welcome," he replied, as if it required nothing more, as if the moment had already passed for him. But for her it had not yet, as she glanced briefly at his daughter, offering a soft smile that the little girl returned shyly before her attention returned to him. Most people would have stayed quiet. She continued, her tone measured, reflective. "It is easier that way." And Daniel looked at her for a second longer, not analyzing, not questioning, just seeing, and then he answered simply, "Easy is not always right." And the words settled between them, steady and unforced, and something in her expression softened, just slightly, like a realization settling into place, and she took a small breath, as if deciding something, before adding, "You did not know anything about me." And Daniel shook his head once, calm, certain. "I did not need to," he said. And again, there was no hesitation, no pride in it, just truth. And for a moment, the city seemed to quiet around them, the distant sounds fading into the background as the weight of that simple exchange lingered. And behind her, through the glass doors, a few figures inside the restaurant had begun to notice, their attention drifting toward the scene outside. Whispers forming quietly as recognition started to ripple through those who understood more than others. But Emily did not look back. She did not need to, because this moment was not for them. It was not for display. It was something smaller, something more real. And she extended her hand, not formally, not as a gesture of status, but gently, deliberately. And when her fingers met his, it was not about power or repayment. It was acknowledgement, quiet and sincere, the kind that does not ask for attention, but leaves an impact anyway. And Daniel did not pull away, did not question it. He simply accepted it with the same calm dignity he had carried from the beginning. And his daughter watched, her eyes wide but peaceful, sensing something important without fully understanding it. And for a few seconds, they stood there like that, under the soft glow of the streetlight, two lives from different worlds connected by something neither of them had planned. And then, from inside, the door opened again, a voice calling softly, "Ms. Carter," and this time, Daniel heard it clearly, the name settling into place without surprise, without reaction, because somehow it did not change what mattered. And Emily glanced back briefly, then returned her gaze to him, a quiet understanding passing between them. And in that moment, nothing else needed to be said. The name lingered in the air, soft but unmistakable, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to narrow into something smaller, quieter, more focused, as if everything unnecessary had fallen away. And Daniel Hayes released her hand slowly, not out of discomfort, not out of doubt, but with the same quiet respect he had shown from the beginning. And he gave a slight nod, acknowledging not the title he had just heard, but the person standing in front of him. And Emily Carter understood that difference instantly, because it was rare, because it was real, and behind her, The man who had been seated inside earlier now stood near the entrance, his posture no longer relaxed. His expression tightened with a realization that had come too late, and he stepped forward hesitantly, calling out, "Ms. Carter," his voice carrying a different tone now, stripped of its earlier confidence, replaced by something closer to caution, and Emily turned her head slightly, not fully, just enough to acknowledge him without giving him the moment he had once assumed belonged to him. And he cleared his throat, forcing a small, controlled smile. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I did not realize." And he paused, searching for the right way to recover something that had already been lost. But Emily did not step toward him, did not rush to ease the situation. She simply stood where she was, her presence calm, composed, and in that stillness, the imbalance became clear to everyone watching, because this was no longer a conversation between equals in power, but a reflection of something deeper. And Daniel glanced briefly toward the man, not with judgment, not with satisfaction, just with quiet awareness, before returning his attention to his daughter, adjusting her coat again as if grounding himself in what truly mattered. And Emily finally spoke, her voice even, unhurried. "There was no misunderstanding," she said, and the simplicity of it carried more weight than any elaborate explanation could have. And the man's expression faltered just for a second before he nodded quickly, attempting to recover. "Of course, I only meant that perhaps we could discuss this further," he added, gesturing vaguely toward the restaurant behind him. But Emily shook her head slightly, her gaze steady. "Respect is not something we negotiate after the fact," she replied, and the words settled with quiet finality, leaving no space for argument, no room for revision. And the street fell silent again, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything important had already been said. And the man lowered his hand slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down in a way he could not deflect. While inside the restaurant, a few employees watched through the glass, their expressions thoughtful, reflective, as if witnessing something that would stay with them long after the night ended. And Emily turned back to Daniel once more, her expression softening just slightly, the edges of authority giving way to something more human, more present. And she gave a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that needed no audience, no validation. And in that quiet exchange, something settled into place, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply, like a truth finally recognized. And for the first time that evening, the man in the suit had nothing left to say and no one left to listen. The silence did not break right away. It lingered, stretching gently across the sidewalk like a held breath that no one wanted to disturb. And Daniel Hayes adjusted his daughter's scarf one last time, his movements careful and familiar, the kind that came from years of quiet responsibility. And when he finished, he looked up at Emily Carter again, not searching for anything, not expecting anything, just present. And she met his gaze with the same calm steadiness. But now there was something more in it, something softer, something that had shifted beneath the surface of everything that had just happened. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, because words would have added less than the silence already held. And behind them, the man in the suit stepped back slowly, his presence fading from the center of the moment, as if the world had gently moved on without him. While inside the restaurant, the glow of warm lights continued. But the energy had changed, quieter now, more reflective, as if everyone inside had been reminded of something they had nearly forgotten. And Emily took a small step back, not to create distance, but to mark the end of something that had been fully seen, fully understood. "I should go," she said softly, her voice carrying both responsibility and reluctance. And Daniel gave a slight nod, understanding without needing explanation. "You have people waiting," he replied, and she allowed a faint smile, the kind that appears when someone recognizes they have been understood without having to explain themselves. And she glanced once more at his daughter, offering a gentle warmth that the little girl returned with a quiet wave, before her attention returned to him. And for a second longer than expected, she stayed there, as if holding on to the moment just a little more, not out of hesitation, but because something real had been found in a place where it was not expected. And then she turned, her steps calm as she walked back toward the restaurant, the door opening softly before closing behind her, leaving Daniel and his daughter standing under the streetlight once more, the city continuing around them as if nothing had changed, and yet something quiet but lasting, and his daughter looked up at him, her eyes thoughtful. "Daddy," she said gently. She looked different when she came outside, and Daniel smiled, not surprised, not confused, just certain. "No," he said softly. She showed who she really was, and the words settled into the night with the same quiet truth that had guided him all along. And as they began to walk down the sidewalk, their footsteps steady, unhurried, the world behind them faded into distance, not because it no longer existed, but because it no longer defined the moment. And inside, as Emily returned to the room where decisions were made and power was measured, she carried something with her that could not be written into any contract, something that did not belong to wealth or position, but to something far more enduring. And for the rest of the evening, and perhaps long after, there would be a quiet understanding shared by everyone who had witnessed it, that dignity does not need to announce itself, that respect is not something granted by status, and that sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who stands quietly, speaks gently, and walks away without needing the world to notice, until the world falls silent anyway.